Quick video here on compression ratio calculations, and this is specifically for the Jaguar XK engine. I'm going to post this as a separate video from the XK120 restoration series I'm doing, and I recommend you check that out if you're interested in Jaguars or old vintage car restoration. But anyway, I think a lot of people have different ways of calculating this. Some ways are more complicated than others, but in general the principle is the same for all engines. Just need to take some standard measurements and apply them to a calculator. Some people go crazy and I don't know about crazy, but they take it to an extreme to get extremely exact measurements. But in reality here, when you're at this point, there's not a whole lot you can do. And when I say at this point, I mean I've already had everything machined. I've had my block decked. I've selected the pistons and bored out the cylinders. So really the only thing I do to impact my compression ratio is select my gasket thickness. So let's go ahead and dig into it. So what is compression ratio? Simply stated, it's the ratio of the volume of the cylinder with the piston at bottom dead center to the volume of the cylinder with the piston at top dead center. So Jaguar standard offerings were 7-to-1, 8-to-1, and 9-to-1 compression ratios. The higher the compression ratio, the better it performs. The lower the compression ratio, the better it's able to handle lower quality fuels. With higher compression ratios, you may get unwanted partial combustions due to the pressure in a chamber, and those are called pings because of the sound that it makes when that occurs. So that's pretty much what compression ratio is. All right, so you're looking at a cross section of an XK engine actually. In this particular case, and really these are the only variables that you need, and I've got some videos upcoming here that show how to take these calculations, but basically your bore diameter indicated by BD there, that's pretty straightforward and obvious. And this will obviously change if you've bored out your cylinder at all for a larger piston. The stroke length represented by the distance that the rod travels as the crankshaft rotates, as SL there, kind of roughly showing that distance. So basically, how far does the piston travel within the cylinder? And then your cylinder head volume, and that's the space actually within the cylinder head where your intake and exhaust valves sit. And then the dome volume. Now this one can be kind of complicated if you've got pistons that are not dome shaped on the top. A dome shape is a very standard shape, obviously easy to calculate the volume, but if you've got one with valleys and all kinds of other irregular configurations, it could be a little more complicated to calculate, and you might need to take moldings or something of the piston to see its displacement. Deck clearance, hard to represent on this particular diagram, but that's pretty obviously the distance between the top of the piston and the deck of the block. And then obviously the gasket thickness. How thick is your cylinder head gasket? And this is the variable you've had the most control of at this point. They range from, for XK engines, anywhere from 15 thousandths of an inch, I think is the standard size, to as much as 60 thousandths of an inch. So those are all things that we need to determine what makes sense for this engine. All right, so we've got the piston flush with the deck, and when I say flush, I mean this portion here along the dome. So basically you want to test that with a straight edge and just make sure that you're flush with the deck. And then you take your dial gauge and you put it perpendicular to the piston and set it to 0. And this will determine how high the piston goes above the deck and tell us what size head gasket we need. So go ahead and turn it. And it looks to be about 24, 25 thou. So if I'm going to get 25 thou under the piston, 25 thou below the deck, I'm going to need a 50 thou head gasket. All right, let's talk a little bit about cylinder head volume. So, you've got 6 cylinders, obviously, in an XK engine. And this is based on the research that I've done. It seems like the older engines, they targeted specifically 100 cubic centimeters per each of these domes. So it looks like some of the newer engines, people have
claimed measurements of 104, 105 cc. So somewhere between 100 and 105 cc is the expected range on these. Now, one thing to take note of is that when they skim the bottom of these heads, you're taking off a lot of the volume here at the largest point of the head. So a 6 thou trim can take off about a cubic centimeter. So generally speaking, I'll look at a range between 99 cubic centimeters and 101 cubic centimeters when doing my calculations. So anyway, yeah, that's just basically the expectations on the cylinder head volume.
All right, so earlier on off camera, I did measure the diameter of the bore, and I determined it to be about 84 millimeters, which does correspond with a 40 thou oversize. So but I do also need to measure the volume of this dome, and you can do calculus to figure this out, but there's a simpler way. This is largely a perfect dome, so you can use a calculator online to determine the volume of this. You just need to know the diameter and the height of this dome. So what I do is I'll just take a caliper, measure the outside diameter, and this doesn't have to be perfect. Here we go, set up the millimeters just. And so we're measuring about 59 millimeters there. And then what I do to measure the height is I drop the piston down, and then at the apex of the dome, I just make sure that that's flush with the deck. It looks like that's pretty darn close. And so then we can measure with the caliper. Like this. So you just stick it on the edge, drop it down, and that's about 13 millimeters. So we have our height, we have our diameter, and we can use the calculator to determine the volume. All right, so here's a dome calculator that we're going to use to calculate the volume of the dome of the piston. I'm not sure what the Monolithic Dome Institute is, but they have a great calculator. This is a free use calculator. Link up there at the top if you're interested. So I've indicated our diameter there at 59 millimeters and our height of 13 millimeters. And it's a pretty regular dome. I don't think there's anything unusual about its shape. This could be maybe off by a couple cubic centimeters, but generally speaking, this could be pretty close to this. So if you look down at the bottom right-hand corner, it comes out as 18,921 millimeters cubed. Real quick calculation, multiply that by, or divide that by 1,000, and you're looking at about 18.9. Just go ahead and call it 19 cubic centimeters for the spherical dome calculation. All right, so this is a compression ratio calculator. Link up there on the top left. I'm not affiliated with this group, but they do have a great calculator that's free to use. What I like about this calculator is you can interchange your units. So you can use both metric and standard units. It'll still calculate the compression ratio. So we got a bore diameter of 84 millimeters, and then a stroke length, and this is a constant value for at least 3.4 XK engines of 4.17 inches. And we talked about how the cylinder head domes are almost exactly 100 cc on the older XK engines. And then when you skin them, you typically lose about 1 cc. So, I mean, this is kind of a plus or minus 1 cc situation. So that's the only number that I don't have real great confidence in. But, nonetheless, we're still getting pretty darn close to the right calculation. Effective dome volume, this is a negative number because the dome and the piston takes away from the cylinder volume. They do have concave pistons or valleyed pistons that actually added the compression ratio. The MGA comes to mind, but there are others. Deck clearance, we talked about how our piston was slightly above the deck. So this is a negative value, minus 25 thousandths of an inch. Then we talked about how we needed a 50 thou head gasket to get the piston about 20 to 30 thou underneath the deck. So you can also add the number of cylinders, like the displacement, which is 3.529 liters, and then our compression ratio is pretty darn close to 8 to 1, 8.04 to 1. And so 8 to 1 was the original spec on this engine. You know, as I mentioned, the only thing you really can change here at this point is the gasket thickness. So, I mean, I think if you get anywhere between 7.75 and 8.25, I mean, that's reasonable. Obviously, if you've done, you've done a lot of machine work and you've pushed it down to 7 to 1, that's obviously not ideal. So anyway, yeah, this is the very simple calculator I like to use. It's free, and I think that this is a very simple way to calculate compression ratio that doesn't overcomplicate things. So I hope you appreciate this video.